made available to people. Increasingly, there is privatization of very basic public service delivery of goods that used to, essential commodities and goods that used to be otherwise provided in most countries in the region by the government. Now there is a shift to provide them to have them provided by private players. The PPP model, the public-private partnership model, is something that governs most areas, whether it's health, education, any other water supply. So what becomes really important and what is in great public interest is that as citizens, we don't just have access to government information, but also to a lot of information, relevant information that is held by private bodies. And it's important to put that in the public domain. For us, this is important, our understanding is that the only way that people are able to actually access their basic rights and entitlements, and that's what experience has shown to us, is if they have information, and in fact, if they have granular information. So even during the COVID-19 pandemic, in my own country, we had many people who died on the road while going from one hospital to another because they did not have information on where hospital beds are available. Basic information about where oxygen supply is available, where certain essential drugs that were needed were available was missing. So I think that there is a huge opportunity for digital platforms, for information to be put out in the public domain through the internet, and for granular information to be put out. We had a situation where oxygen cylinders were being sold in the black market to the highest bidder. So we needed information, and I think that that's something that the world has recognized, the importance of open, free information which is available in an easy to access manner. Now here I'm going to talk about the digital divide and the very important need to bring that into all of our guidelines and let that be the guiding force in many ways as far as dissemination is concerned. Because when we think of dissemination, really citizens have to be at the heart, at the core of the entire framework. In many countries, we have a very huge digital divide, and it has many dimensions. It has the class dimension, it has the gender dimension. So studies have shown that in a country like India, only about 35% of the people have access to the internet. And there are studies that have shown that 1 out of 3 women have ever used the internet in their lives. Now, if we have to put out information that is so critical for people to have, that has the potential to save their lives, then that information has to be accessible to all. And we have to think of ways that it can be made accessible. There are 2 or 3 things. One is that there has to be a focus on appropriate technology. So a lot of people don't have access to smartphones in rural areas and other areas, but they do have access to some form of a handset, some sort of a basic mobile phone. So IVR, the voice recognition technology, can be used to ensure that voice messages are sent to people who are not lettered. We need to have systems by which SMSs can be sent on basic handsets, and also display boards can be used so that real-time data can be constantly updated. One system that we found very useful is to have decentralized, localized information facilitation centers, where there is actively somebody sitting and ensuring that somebody who doesn't have access to a computer or the internet can actually be helped to access the information from those devices which they don't have access to. It's very important while thinking of these data sets and when we put them out that they be searchable, they should not be behind paywalls to make them accessible, and they should be, whatever information is put out, must be in easy to understand local languages. It cannot be technical. I mean, I remember after a very long struggle, people managed to get the Information Commission in India to order that all public works that are done, information about them should be put out in the public domain. And yes, it was. It was in the internet, it was everywhere. But when we started looking at the information, we understood nothing. Because a lot of the work said P/L of CCR. Now that makes no sense to anybody, even a very educated person. So we had to actually seek help from an engineer to realize that P/L is providing and laying and CCR is cement concrete roads. Now, I mean, if this imagination is not there while creating data sets, while digitizing information and putting it in the public domain, it really makes no sense for people. The other issue, and I think that that's very important when we are seeing democracy deficit across the world growing, is the problem of internet shutdowns. I mean, at the drop of a hat, governments shut down internet access when it's not convenient. And that, I think, is a huge problem because you put everything on the net, you say that we've gone digital, it's e-governance, and then when people might need it the most, those internet shutdowns are put in place. So unless we think about having access to the internet in some senses also as a right, we can't really think of shifting at least to purely these systems. I'm going to say that artificial intelligence and some of these frameworks are very important, they have tremendous potential, but they need to be deployed with utmost care because they should not lead ultimately to disempowering those very people that we want to empower. I'll again share an example. In Delhi, we have a large number of people who are dependent on the government for their subsidized food grains, for their ration supplies. And suddenly, more than 25% of the ration cards were cancelled. And when we tried to find out why, we were told that there was a new technology which was based on biometric authentication that had been put in place, because of which people were not able to get their rations for 3 months. And the algorithm that was being used to cancel ration cards was that if somebody does not get ration for 3 months, then their card is cancelled because they're probably ghost ration cards. So there were all these people who had been queuing up, not getting their rations for no fault of theirs, but their cards were cancelled because the system read it as ration not being picked. Now, I think there has to be great emphasis, even in our guidelines, that there has to be transparency in the process of making these algorithms. There has to be space for public consultation, otherwise we are going to end up in a huge problem. The need for oversight bodies and for effective information commissions cannot be overstated. We know that information that government wants to give out is often information that we don't really need. I mean, what information we really require is what we request for. So a lot of times information that's inconvenient is not given out by governments unless there is a strong appeal, independent appeal process. So an independent information commission is an absolute must in our guidelines that must come out. One or two very quick points I'm going to make. How government official business is being transacted has changed dramatically. So we have now reliance on WhatsApp groups, we have reliance on private servers, and across the world that's leading to a huge challenge in terms of accessing information. So suddenly in India, for example, there is a huge public works program that the government runs. The central government set up a WhatsApp group by which officers were being told not to enroll people on the program to cut costs. Now, this is so critical because people were not able to access any of that information, any of those records, because this was all off the record. This was all happening on people's private phones through WhatsApp. So where does that leave the right to people's information to access information about decision making? Because I think that increasingly decision making is being shifted to certain platforms which are not included traditionally in the kinds of information that we think about. Another problem which we need to address, and I think that has been talked about in the guidelines to some extent, but I think it's really worth highlighting, is that there should be the data protection systems, the privacy frameworks are very important, and especially in the world of digitization and AI. But they have to be in line with transparency principles and with the transparency framework. So for example, in India, it's virtually impossible for people to access their basic rights, whether it's food or it's pensions or it's social security, unless they have information. Unless they have information, they have records that give information about who is supposed to get that facility or that right, and how much has actually been shown on paper to have been given. Now, when this information started getting used effectively, and this was put on the website, it started causing some trouble and some inconvenient questions to be raised, and these databases were pulled down in the name of privacy and data protection. So there is no way for people to check, to monitor, for citizen oversight, unless they have information. So for example, you need information to do a social audit, to even do a basic check. You need to know what the government record is saying. Does your name appear on that list? If yes, then how much has been given to you on paper? And unless you have that information, there is no way to check whether your right has been denied to you or not. So for these basic oversight to be done, which is really what we want, what Toby talked about, fighting corruption, and that is a huge part of people using the right to information. And in countries where corruption is a problem, I think it's proven to be a very, very empowering tool for people to access information and hold their governments accountable. And there is absolutely no way to do it if in the name of privacy or data protection, some of these basic data sets are pulled down or made inaccessible to people. I'm going to stop here and we can talk.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.